Dare great things for Christ. Christ calls us to dare great things. In the marketplace, as well as in the mission field, there has never been a time like the present for the spirit of the Catholic entrepreneur. Now is the time for men and women of great courage and great vision to engage our church and our culture. Now is the time to dare great things. And here is your host as we dare great things, Father Nathan Cromley, the president and founder of the St. John Institute.
Most Christians charged with positions of leadership tend to separate what they have to do every day in a practical sphere from their growth as Christians. Spirituality and practicality are often looked at as opposites. When this happens, though, two things occur. Firstly, the world of practicality is left bereft of spiritual guidance, and simultaneously, our spirituality loses the strength that comes from our practical endeavors. By uniting the two, the Christian has an advantage. All right, so welcome back. We're now in our 9th class here on the Christian leader's advantage. What we're trying to show is that faith is not just something that benefits our souls, it's actually something that transforms us as people. And since faith brings us closer to God, we should be becoming better people for believing. So what does a better person look like? Well, a better person looks like someone who's ethical, of course, but it's more than that. A good person is someone who becomes virtuous, meaning that the way that we act when we are good is better than the way that we act when we aren't good. We develop our skill sets as people. Now, I think a lot of times we think of our skills just as what's necessary for us to do our jobs, but skills are a much broader concept than just what's necessary to get a job done. Skills are the ability to listen. Skills are the ability to hold your tongue, to be patient, right? I mean, if you really talk to someone who is developed as a person, you almost automatically put them in a position of leadership because you see in them this greatness, which has the ability to influence others in a positive way, and you want them to do that. Someone who's gone through a lot in their life or has borne a lot of responsibility has this type of metal to their soul, right? A type of toughness, but where they're just developed. They have a look in their eyes and a bearing about them that commands a room. And I'm sure you all have experiences like this. You could think of people like this, that they walk into a room and people just tend to gather around them, listen to them. There's a respect that people show, and you say, well, where does this come from? Well, it comes from virtue. That's where it comes from. And where does virtue come from? Well, it comes from this person pushing themselves towards something that's spiritual. Now, of course, we who are Christians, by pursuing God, ought to be the most virtuous of them all. And the fact that we're not is just a testament to the fact that most of us are not really living our faith as deeply as we could. If we did, if our faith was more real, we would be more real too. And the more real a person is, the more that their soul, their intelligence, their heart shines through their actions and their bearing, and the more that leadership is an easy result. I'll give you an example of this. Just the other day, I was picked up at the airport. I came back from preaching, and I was in Denver, and I got picked up, and the Uber driver that met me didn't do anything. He didn't get out of his car, and so I just opened the door, opened the trunk. He popped the trunk for me. I put my bags in there. And as soon as I entered the car, I knew that this guy was extraordinary. And how did I know? Well, the car was impeccably clean. The way that he greeted me was concise and correct, focused. He didn't have the radio playing. Instead, he was completely attentive to me, even though he didn't get out of the car. So as I went through, my trip with him, I started asking him some questions. And the way that he answered, it just bespoke a type of development inside of him. This was not a normal person. Sure enough, I just said, hey, so why are you driving an Uber? And he said, well, because I can't use my legs anymore to walk, and my wife insists that I get out of the house, so this is the best thing that I could do. Well, my interest was piqued here because this was someone who was different from most of the Uber drivers that I experienced. And as it turns out, I was correct. The man has 2 PhDs from MIT, one in aeronautical engineering, one in astrophysics. He worked as a test pilot flying stealth bombers of the 6th generation before he crashed with a stealth bomber on a test flight and ended up becoming injured so badly that he's now driving an Uber in Denver. But how did I know that this guy was different? I mean, we hardly spoke, that much while we were driving. I could just sense it because out of every pore of his body, the man was in control of what he was doing. He was self-possessed. He understood where I was, and he was like the perfect servant. You feel it when someone's developed. You feel it when someone's excellent. If you've ever done interviews, you know, there's so much about a person that comes through from the way that they present themselves, about who they are and what they've gone through deep inside. And it's not just that everything's okay. If you want to lead effectively in a position of power, you need that type of inner development. I remember one time I met a person who I'll never forget him, even though I only met him one time, because he had this kind of depth to him, of natural leadership. You could say, well, not just natural, but like he became a leader. When you really are in the presence of a leader, you know it. They impact you. Well, this guy did this. I was in a foreign country and I was having dinner with a general from the army of that country. He was a retired general and he was a devout Catholic, went to mass every day, prayed the rosary and all of this. And yet, now he was in his retirement, so he had invited a group of the religious brothers of the community I was with to come to dinner with him. And there he was telling us some stories after dinner. We were asking questions. And one of the brothers that was there asked a question that was a little bit imprudent, maybe not polite anyway, because he asked him, hey, listen, we know that you are a Catholic, you love God, you pray all the time, and yet your profession as a general was, involving the deaths of people. How do you reconcile these two? And I'll never forget it, because he looked the brother right in the eyes, and he said, every bullet that was fired under any man in my command while I was in command was fired by me. Now, there was a silence that just came over the room, right? Because it wasn't so much that you agreed with him or you didn't, or that you had an objection or you didn't. It was the way that he said it, as he took complete ownership of his action and he claimed full responsibility for his leadership. It was kind of an awesome moment. Just to have anyone, if anyone were to do that, like to really fill their life with their own freedom, right? And declare that their life is the way it is because they have chosen it as such and they stand behind their choices. There's just an awe-filled presence that's in that room, right? Because you realize that the practical actions that they did in their life, whatever it was, from being an auto mechanic to being a swim coach in Cincinnati to wherever you are you doing it? Do you claim that? Is that something that's coming from your freedom, where this is a statement where I put my name on everything that I do? Is it there? Well, if it is, then your work is something more than work. Your work is something wherein your spirit is actually formed. Your person becomes shaped by what you do when you put yourself in it. Now, here's the thing. We as Christians are supposed to put ourselves into our work. We're not supposed to be anonymous. We're not supposed to be just machines. We're not supposed to be able to be replaced by a robot or AI or whatever is floating around out there. We are supposed to own our work so that it comes from the heart and that the work thereby becomes an expression of who we are. This suddenly is an amazing thing because our work becomes spiritual and the pathway for us to become holy. And what an advantage this is for a Christian leader. We attack the work that we do from a different vantage point. We look at it from the point of view of our pathway to God, and that transforms everything that we do.
Hey ladies, you're invited to St. John Institute's Fit Women's Hike Retreat, a 3-day hike through Colorado's Monarch Pass, where we'll teach you how to hear the voice of God calling you by name to dare great things for Christ. Take a break from your daily grind and let God lead you to your limits to prove that you can go wherever He may call you. Retreat dates are Monday, July 22nd through Friday, July 26th. Head over to stjohninstitute.org/SJI-events to join us. We hope to see you there.
So when we look at work as an expression of the soul, an expression of our identity, when we look at what we do as an expression of our freedom, this is what I have chosen to do, in other words, our work can then impact us in a way that's very profound. And here, I know I talk about this a lot, but I want to bring out two particular points in this class. The first is the advantage that this gives us as a leader, and the second is the way that this allows us to become saints. First, the advantage that it gives us as a leader. One of the biggest struggles that any person has when they're striving for excellence is that we don't know to whom we ought to be accountable. You could almost look at accountability as a measure of the kind of excellence that you're going to achieve. If you show me to whom you are accountable, by what standard you're judging yourself, right? In other words, or to what height you're holding yourself in your efforts to develop yourself and to be a good leader, well, that's going to determine the kind of development and the height and the depth and the intensity of the development that you're going to achieve. If you, for example, say, well, my goal is whatever Weight Watchers tells me to do, that's what I'll do. Well, so Weight Watchers is a pretty good guide, and they'll guide you to, therefore, the effect that they have for you. And you will lose weight. Of course, that's, the brand promise anyway. At least you'll watch it. If you don't lose it, you'll watch your weight. But whatever this is, you see, okay, well, that's fine. But it's also kind of shallow. Because is that real excellence to lose weight? Well, no. Our moral excellence requires a higher standard than physical excellence itself. Moral excellence, it's to act according to a standard. What's the standard by which we are judged in our actions? If you're not a person of faith, you're going to have a standard of your boss, for example, and how they act. Or even better, and much more common, the way that we perceive that our boss wants us to act. There are people that are just experts at this. In other words, you go into a position in a company and you just know, if I do the following things, I'll succeed. And if I don't do the following things, I'll be punished. Therefore, I'll do the following things. I will make sure that I'm noticed. I'll make sure that I do everything to please the person in whose authority I'm operating. Well, I guess that could be a fine thing if the person's a sense of authority above you is one that's excellent and that holds you to kind, generous, loving actions. Well, sure, that could help. But even if your superior at work is someone who really is excellent, their ideas are going to fall far short of the perfection that could come from Christ, from God, right? But be that as it may, the point I'm trying to make is the standard by which we measure our actions will have a large impact to determining just how good our actions become. And if our actions are good, that will shape our character. So our character follows our actions follow the standard to which we are accountable. Well, now follow the logic with that. Well, what was the Christian advantage? Well, the standard to which we are accountable as Christians is the cross of Jesus Christ and Christ crucified upon it. It's the highest standard that there is. So what's the impact for this on my leadership, Father Nathan? Well, if you were actually acting every day filled and informed by the Spirit of Jesus Christ, your life would be a lot more impactful. Look at how impactful his life was. He's born in Bethlehem, lives in Nazareth, doesn't have, a lot of money, doesn't have a social status, is not educated in Jerusalem, and yet his life has impacted the course of history more than any other. Why? Because he was God, number one. But then number two, his humanity, it was just perfect. And a perfect humanity is dense, it's solid. And his was so solid that even time itself bent around his birth. BC and AD, from before Christ to the year of the Lord. I mean, the moment he was born, they redid the numbering of the years to say that marks 0. And from 0, we go forward. Now, you think about that. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to be you, right? Fortunately, none of us is going to be like Jesus. And yet, if we could even just get a little bit closer to him, the influence of our life would become that much the more profound. Well, so if I'm now saying to follow Christ in your work and to live your work as if you were doing it for God, and not only for God, but do it with God and in God, like to take your spirituality deep inside of your heart and then allow its energy, its drive, the inner motion of that spirituality to focus you on your job. It's not a distraction, in other words. Almost like, well, I got my God on the side. I mean, if you're a business analyst, you don't have just your God on the side. You're looking at the data as a service to God, and you're looking at that data with God's help as a service to humanity, so that data can be analyzed as efficiently and as wonderfully as you possibly can, because you believe in what you're doing. And if you don't believe in what you're doing, then do something else. It's unbefitting a Christian to not do what they believe in. Okay, so now obviously there's conditions where you just can't do that, and there's times you just can't do that, etc. But at the same time, you should believe in what you're doing as a gift, because then it opens you to give that gift to God and to never think small about your life again, or define yourself as just a. It's like when I meet, mothers, and I meet a woman, and I'll say, "What do you do?" And she says, "I'm just a mom." If I ever hear that, every time I hear that, I just get all irritated about it, because I'm like, just a mom? I mean, it's the greatest thing you can do on the earth. There is no higher thing anyone can do than give birth to a human being. I mean, and then to mother that human being, teaching them how to be human. It's the profession, so to speak, that we should all rally behind, defend, enhance, celebrate, and promote. Motherhood. Now, of course, fatherhood is an amazing thing too, because but that's the life of the family. And yet, we're people, I'm just a, well, you could in the same way, I'm just a plumber. I'm like, just a plumber. Do you realize how important that is to be a plumber? I remember when my sewer main line went out in my building, my entire ministry had to stop because we had a sewer backup in the building. Why? We needed a plumber. That's just a plumber. I'm like, without you, we couldn't run the ministry. I mean, think of all the things that would go to pot if no one was there to fix our pots. So, just making a little joke. But you get the point, what I'm trying to say here. A Christian doesn't think small about anything that they're doing with, through, and in God.
Would you like to start your Thursday mornings with a scriptural leadership lesson? Join the St. John Leadership Network, where Father Nathan hosts a 30-minute call at 6:30 a.m. in all 4 U.S. time zones. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
All right, so when we're talking about leadership from a Christian perspective, we emphasize the advantage that this gives to us as workers and in the places of business where we work. And it does. A huge advantage. The one I'm accountable to is God himself. Well, if I'm accountable to God, then my actions are going to be held to a standard that is higher. What will that yield? That'll yield better actions, more consistent, better actions. I'm going to be a good human being in my company. And my friends, I want to emphasize, this is much more than a nice thought. This is the difference between a successful business and a failure. I mean, and you know this. Anyone who's been a boss knows this. I mean, the way that a team can gel together determines whether or not that team is going to be effective. You could have the greatest geniuses in the world working on the team, but if they're fighting, if they are jealous of each other, if they stab each other in the back, if they crush down the lower talent, etc., the team's not going to be nearly as effective as a team that actually cares about each other, brings understanding, tries to create dialogue. All the team dynamics that you see that are put out there by these leadership gurus, they're actually speaking about Christianity. I mean, they're bringing out a Christian concept. That is, that accompany, for example, co-pan, right? What does that mean? With bread. It's people you share or break bread with. That's what accompany means if you break the word down. Those with whom you break bread. Well, what does that sound like? Sounds like the Christian church. Exactly. So the more that I can be around you as someone with whom you could break bread, you could trust, you could live in a human way, well, the better we're going to work together. I mean, and that's not even then talking about customer service. I mean, you could instantly tell how well a company treats its people by how well they treat you. And when you're treated well, the loyalty increases, the tips increase, that you can even raise your prices and people will still go there because of the ambiance, the atmosphere, the way that they're treated. How many sales are not made simply because the person chooses to not trust the salesperson, etc. Well, all of those advantages come when you bring a faith to say our standard is unabashedly and unashamedly the standard of God. You might not believe in God as a worker for me. Your faith question is up to you. I'm not bringing that out. But I'm saying our culture, since I'm the one leading it, we're going to put the highest standard. We're going to live as if Jesus Christ was our standard. A person who lived absolute excellence is going to be the one to whom we're holding our culture in account and in reference to. Well, I don't see any way possible that that's a negative thing. On the contrary, it's going to create an advantage. We will treat one another as Jesus has treated us. And for as much as all this is true, there's a second advantage. This one is to the Christian worker yourselves, right? So why should I bring my faith into my work? And I said, well, because it'll make your work better, number one. But number two, it'll make you holy. I want you to think about this. You spend, say, 8 hours a day at work. It's more like 10 for most of you. And then if you add your commute in there, you're pushing to 12. So even if you're more modest, and we just say it's 8 hours a day of work. Well, if you sleep, say, 8 hours a day, and even if you don't, by the time you bed down, you unwind, put that time in there, it's 8 hours a day. That leaves you with another 8 hours of your day to do anything else. So you are, in your waking hours, if you take the 8 hours of sleep or winding down or whatever away, you're left with 16 hours of wake active time. And 1/2 of them are spent at work. And I'm really talking about the time getting ready for work, getting dressed, doing your hair, all the things that you need to do just to I'm not even talking about that. 1/2 of your waking life is spent at work. Now, if you add Saturday and Sunday, you can kind of tip the scales a little bit, but do the math yourself. Take the amount of time where your work demands your life from you and start to track it. Tell me how much of your waking time that is. I bet it's near half. Well, if you spend half of your waking hours doing anything, wouldn't you want it to be productive? Of course you do. Well, what's going to make your waking hours the most productive? If your waking hours could lead you to heaven. I have a hard time imagining that anyone would say, well, this is a prudent use of my time, if in fact I find that it's a waste of time for the most important things in my life. The development of my intelligence, the development of my heart. I should become a better person at work. My friends, if you're not becoming a better person at work, then you're becoming a worse person because your work is half of your life. So if you're spending half of your life in wasted time or worse, in an environment that doesn't help you to develop who you are in a good sense, to become holy, well then you're really hurting yourself by staying. A Christian doesn't do that. A Christian, on the other hand, sees everything as an opportunity to give to God and to do it for God, with God. And that could be, some jobs are really tough. I remember the worst job I ever had in my life. And I actually think if we made prisoners in prisons do this job, there would be less crime in the world. And that is gathering chicken eggs at a chicken egg farm. I did it, was making $3.65 an hour. I rode my bike to the chicken farm, some 5 miles, just to gather the chicken eggs. And then would have to ride my bike 5 miles back. And you smelled so bad that you couldn't even take a shower in the house, because you would stink up the house with this strange odor. Anyone who knows chickens knows that odor does not go away. It just lingers in the air. It's some strange proof of a scientific law no one really understands. But so instead I'd have to go outside and just take a hose and hose myself down outside just to get clean enough to go inside to actually take a shower. It was absolutely miserable. And I remember that job so well because I thought, how do I redeem this? I tried listening to tapes. I'd be praying the rosary as I was gathering the chicken eggs. And it was just really hard. And a factory job for most people is a very hard thing to redeem. I can understand that. What's neat about the Christian advantage here, though, is that we remember that we follow a crucified Lord who made suffering the expression of his love. And therefore, the toil that many of us have to endure as a part of our jobs, the unwanted aspects of our life in business, the professions that can grind against us in many ways, can themselves be sanctified by being united actively to Christ on the cross. Offering up your toil makes it a prayer. And that prayer is a powerful prayer. It's the prayer of intercession, whereby you say, like St. Paul, my sufferings are for your salvation. Well, your sufferings can be for the salvation of your family, of those for whom you pray. You can lift up in union with the Mass the difficulties that you have. And at the same time, though, we know our work is not just toil. There's a lot of accomplishment. And those too become a place where we glorify God. But in all of this, when I bring my faith into my work, I find a pathway for holiness because I take my profession and I make it a prayer. And this is a gift that Jesus gives to us who are leading in his name, to lead in his name, to lead with him, through him, and in him, to not be afraid to allow Jesus to use us as his instruments, and for us to use our prayer as a sacrifice and an offering to him for his glory and for the salvation of souls.
Dare great things for Christ.
Share your feedback with Father Nathan. Send us an email at communications@stjohninstitute.org. That's communications@stjohninstitute.org. And visit www.stjohninstitute.org and sign up for our newsletter to receive updates from Father Nathan.